Hello, this is Charles Brewer, President of the Civil War Study Group here at Lake of the Woods, Virginia. Welcome to the recording of our program on October 27th, 2023. Thank you very much for coming today. This is a very outstanding turnout, and I congratulate each and every one of you for making time for this today's presentation. I'm Charles Brewer, President of the Civil War Study Group here at Lake of the Woods. Before we hear from our speaker, I'd like to cover a few things. First, let me ask the members of our board who are present to stand up, rise, each and every, or else raise their hand. Okay, there they are. Now, these are, including myself, these are the people that I would ask you to approach with any ideas for speakers or any ideas for projects. Indeed, we do listen to you. Two of our speakers this year came from recommendations from you all. So we do listen, and we do need all the help we can get. Please visit our website. It has been recently updated with a list of our 2024 programs. It's not a complete list yet. We're still working on it. So if you have any ideas for speakers, please let us know. And one of the menu pull-down items is resources. And in that resources is a, what is it I'm trying to say? Okay, so we've put up over the years a number of historic panels in Lake of the Woods. It's where we do the research, we get the panel produced at our cost, and then we gift it to Lake of the Woods. So there is a way to look at that in the website. And if you've not ever taken one of these, I'll leave it on the table here. But we have this trifold that has, down there now, a trifold that has nifty little things that you can use your phone to scan, and it'll take you right to the appropriate website page. I'm going to bend down a moment. I can edit this out of the video. So I'm leaving that right here for you. There you go. And then our next program will be in this space on Friday, November 17, starting at 10:30. Our speaker will be one of the founders of this study group and its current chairman emeritus, Dr. Pete Rainey. His topic will be "The Army of the Potomac Withdrew in Anger." He will talk about the devastated landscape and depleted population hereabouts in the last 2 years of the war. So I'm sure you'll want to come and see that. Our speaker today is Lewis Rogers. He's the new permanent superintendent of the Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Historic Park. Not so new anymore because you've been on the job more than a few months. So, but in any event. Superintendent Rogers has been with the National Park Service for more than 39 years. He's served in 12 different posts, which have included the Petersburg National Battlefield, where he was during the sesquicentennial, and helped prepare that battlefield park for the sesquicentennial observations. The Independence National Historic Park, Valley Forge National Historic Site, Booker T Washington National Museum, is that what the name? Monument, pardon me. National Monument, and the Saint-Gaudens National Historic Site. He says his experience in all of these postings allowed him to witness how each grappled with the NPS, National Park Service challenge, to tell a complete story. He holds a BS degree in resource management from Slippery Rock University. In addition to historical interpretation and park management, he has fought fires in Oregon, California, and Wyoming. Great. He also holds certifications from the National Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, so be careful of what you do or say. I'm going to be passing this around, so if we don't have your email address so that we can keep you in contact, put it down here. Or if your email has changed. So with that, I'll turn the podium over to Superintendent Rogers.
Okay, great, works. I wasn't going to wear this in the beginning, but sometimes my voice gets a little soft, so I thought I should, I'd rather start out with it than have everybody kind of doing this in the back of the room. So, as you said, my name is Louis Rogers. I'm the superintendent of Fredericksburg-Spotsylvania National Military Park. When I do these talks, my talks are a little different. I'm not a historian, and I don't approach history in that way. I'm more of a storyteller, and I try to bring out lessons from those stories. What I want to share with you today is, I feel like in my life, as the way I grew up, the things that I went through in my life prepared me for this job. I feel like I was made to be in this position and to be in this job and to work for the National Park Service. So as I start out in my talk, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my history, some of the things I went through, some of the lessons that I learned. Then I'm going to kind of switch over to talk about the National Park Service, what the Park Service is about, and then a little bit about the park here. The National Park Service, I've always felt that the National Park Service is at its best. We are doing our very best. We are right in the wheelhouse. We find ourselves at the intersection of history and place, story and place. So in other words, we tell stories, right? We learn about history, we research about history, we research about the natural environment, and then we have that place in which those things actually happen. And we tell those stories in that place. And if we do it right, you can feel your hair stand up on the back of your neck, because you're right in that place. If I could take you to a place and show you a battle that starts out, and we're standing in that place, and you look down and you see those little percussion caps, right? With the soldier, as he was firing and loading, and he popped those percussion caps off and he shot. And you find them in the ground, you know that that soldier was standing right in that very spot. And you talk about what they did and what they went through. The other piece that I embrace is that we want to talk a little bit more about what brought us to that point. We want to talk a little bit more about the experiences and the struggles that people went through. And we want to tell the stories that have not been told. One of the lessons I learned working in this job for 39, going on 40 years, is that, and I don't know if you know this or not, but history is not about the past. It's not about past events. When you have history, history goes on all the time. It's linear. It's always occurring. And so when you go to tell history, you go to tell stories, you can't tell everything, right? So we take snapshots of history. We tell this piece of story, that piece of story, that piece of story. You learn about yourself when you turn around and look at what pieces you chose and what pieces you left out. It's not a bad thing. It's just we tend to tell those parts and keep the parts that mean the most to us. And as part of the National Park Service, we want to begin to look out and find the stories, the snapshots, and the pieces that we left out and bring them back in. So we're making sure we're telling everybody's story. My mom died from Alzheimer's. This is a little bit over a year ago. And when she started struggling with this, I went back home to visit, to stay a while. My sister came home to visit. And while we were there, she started going through some of those old boxes that, you know, you find up in the back in the cupboard or under the bed and so on. And she's pulling stuff out, right? And she starts pulling out these old black and white pictures. And she pulls out this picture and she says, "Who is this?" And she hands it to me and I look and I see this little skinny little bald head kid standing there. And I'm looking like, who is it? And I'm looking and I'm looking and I'm like, oh, that's me. And I had real cut off jeans. You know, they cut off jeans now you buy them from the store. No, these were actually long jeans that we cut off, you know, with the little frayed bottoms on it and all. And when I was standing there, I had a milk jug in my hand. I was holding it in my arms, and the top of the milk jug was cut off. And I thought, why was I holding that milk jug? And it was dirty, it was dirt inside. And I'm like, why was I? And I'm looking, and then it dawned on me, I remembered. Where I grew up at, I grew up in the suburbs of Pittsburgh, so there were a lot of houses and things, but then there were these little plots of land that were just too, I guess, hostile to build on. And when I say hostile, I mean like the terrain, in a way. You just couldn't get a house on, you had to do too much to put a house in. So he ended up staying trees and wooded areas. And one of these areas had springs that came up. And we would run into that land, and we would turn over rocks. And we found salamanders, we found crayfish, we found all kinds of creepy things. And then we got my gallon jug, and we would put them in a jug. And that's what I was doing. I was standing there holding my salamanders in my jug when they took the picture. As I grew older, I found that I had a very draw to the natural environment. We got BB guns, right? So you go hunting with your BB gun. And when I went and I found other patches of woods just to walk through, and when I walked through it, I always cradled my BB gun as I walked through the woods. I never shot anything, but it was like not manly just to go walking through the woods, just to walk through the woods. So I had to have something, right? And I found that I had this love. I found myself to the three rivers in Pittsburgh, the very deep rivers, and I found a draw and a love and a peace there. So there was a part of me that was really drawn to the natural environment. I mean, there were times I would even go outside to shovel snow for my dad, and I would stay out there. And then it's the middle of winter, and it's cold. I'd stay out there for hours because I just like looking up at the sky and looking at the stars and just being out in nature. So that was my love of the natural environment. The second piece that came for me, and I guess I would title this that history saved my soul. History rescued me. And I'm gonna tell you, I hate memorizing stuff. I hate memorizing dates and things of that nature, so it's not that kind of a thing. It's more of the philosophical and what I learned. When I grew up in Pennsylvania, the area was segregated. It was redlined. They did purposely separate races of people. But when they integrated the schools, when I integrated about the third grade, things got a little hostile. You know, there were a lot of kids that didn't like me. And when they brought us into the school, we were very separated. So in a school of about 40 kids, you know, there may be one or two in that class, not in the school, in a classroom of 40, it was a very big district. There may be one or two in that class that were African American, and the rest were not. And I had people tell me, go back to Africa where you come from. I've had people tell me that I didn't belong. I've had people tell me that this was not my country. And the peculiar thing about that is that when people tell you that, even when you know it's not right, if you hear it enough times, it tends to sink in. Somewhere deep down inside, you start to believe it. And it starts to color how you see the world. It starts to influence how you move through the world and the things that you do. Now, when I was young, before this happened, I loved flight. I loved everything about flight. I loved planes. I loved watching John Wayne in the Flying Leathernecks. I loved watching Pappy Boynton in the Black Sheep Squadron. I just ate it up every moment, every second. And when I watched them, It didn't register in my head that there were no black people there. Those are my guys. I related to that. That was me. When racism came along, that's when I began to notice. When people told me I did not belong, I tried to look for a counter narrative that said I did. And I didn't see it. So that it forced my belief that I didn't belong. At one point, there was a magazine that came out, it was called Tony Brown's Journal. And in that magazine, he talked about the Tuskegee Airmen. And when I saw the Tuskegee Airmen, when I learned about them, it gave me a place. I found my spot in history. Now, there was a peculiar thing that happened when that occurred. I didn't simply embrace the Tuskegee Airmen. I embraced the whole. I didn't embrace a part. When I saw my part of the story, when I saw my place in the tapestry of the country, I became a part of it once again. And I saw my community and my country through eyes of someone that belonged. When I watched Pappy Boynton and when I watched the Leathernecks, initially I soured because of what I had been told. And then when I went to watch it again, I didn't see myself there. But when I watched them the second time, after I learned about the Tuskegee Airmen, even though I didn't see myself on that TV, I knew that somewhere out there, over the horizon, somewhere behind that mountain, I was flying at P-59 this name. I knew I was there. I didn't always need to see myself because I knew the truth. I knew the facts. I had the evidence that I belonged. And that makes all the difference in the world. One of the things that I learned a couple lessons about history, one of which I told you, two of which I told you. If you hear something long enough, you begin to believe it. It begins to sink in and it begins to color your world. And once you hear something like that, when I was a child, I didn't come into the world that way. I didn't see things that way until someone told me. Once you hear it, you need a counter narrative. You need evidence of the contrary. You need something that says that this isn't true. Otherwise, you tend to believe it. And I also learned that once you embrace the part, you embrace the whole. America, I was taught as a child, was a melting pot. Everybody came from their different places in the world. And when we came from those different places, we came together and made up the country. It is very important that everyone can find themselves in the country. It doesn't mean you change the whole narrative. It doesn't mean that this country has a narrative about itself as a whole, right? History, when I say history, is not about the past. It's about the future. It's about values. Because we choose to remember those things that represent who and what we are. You remember the story about George Washington and the cherry tree. He didn't cut down a cherry tree, right? But that story was told because we believed in honesty. He says, I cannot tell why. You know, we tell a story about Washington and him passing, right, the leadership on when he was president. We often tell that story because it was a peaceful transfer of power. And that was very important to us and very important to our nation. So those are the stories we remember. And so we want to add the other stories in there, right, that represent, that tell other people's part, that tell other people's side, so that everybody can see themselves and everyone can belong. And again, remember that history is It's not about the past. Because you can't tell everything about the past. So you have to make choices. You have to make decisions about what piece you're going to tell, what piece you're not going to tell, what piece you're going to influence. And sometimes those pieces aren't the same to all of us. I remember when I first came to Petersburg, there was a group that wanted to honor a man by the name of Dick Poplar. Dick Poplar was an African American, I think he was a cook for the Confederates. And when the Union came through and they captured him, they put him in jail. They put the Confederates in jail, they put everyone in jail. And when they came by to release them, he saw Dick Poplar, they wanted to release him. He says, no, I don't want to be released, I want to stay with my friends. I want to stay with the folks that he was with. And they honored him. Well, that's okay, you can honor them, right? History is about your audience and who you're talking to. But that story didn't resonate to me. Because that's not the kind of story I want to tell my son. That's not the kind of story I want my daughter or my son to embrace. So we have to be careful with that. Next piece I want to talk about is the National Park Service. The National Park Service was brought about in 1916. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the Organic Act. So the Organic Act was what Congress voted on and described the National Park Service and brought the Park Service system in as a whole. And the Organic Act states that the service thus established shall promote and regulate the use of federal areas known as national parks, monuments, and reservations, hereinafter specified by such means and measures as conform to the fundamental purpose of the said parks, monuments, and reservations, which purpose is to conserve the scenery and the natural and historic objects and the wildlife therein, and to provide for the enjoyment of the same in such a manner and by such a means as will leave them unimpaired for future generations. Everything we do is reflected in this. When I said, when the National Park Service finds itself at the intersection of story and place, in here, there's one line that says, which purpose is to conserve the scenery and the natural and historic objects and the wildlife therein. That's place. Then it says to provide for the enjoyment of the same. That's story. Because we preserve these places, right? And to help you enjoy it, we tell you a story. We tell you something about it. We tell you what happened here. We tell you the significance of what happened here. So that's the intersection of story and place. The Organic Act was challenged twice in court. One time it was challenged by the NRA, and it was challenged about trapping. People wanted to trap inside the national park. And they believed that you could trap and have a consumptive use of the park and the park still go on. The Assistant Secretary for Fish and Wildlife and Parks argued that conservation does not mean consumptive use. And the courts agreed. And the court said that the Organic Act speaks to but one single purpose, and that's conservation. And then they said the word conservation in the Organic Act actually means preservation. And then the court said there are no consumptive uses of natural resources in the national park system unless specifically and directly provided by Congress. So, when we acquire things of national significance, our number one job is to preserve it. I cannot put a shovel in the ground in the park without going through compliance. And compliance is where we bring a number of different disciplines together: archaeology, museum curation, natural history, archaeology, and historians, history. And when these folks come together, they're a group of people, and each park has that same group. When we go to do a project, we have to lay that project out in front of them. And they look at that project from every one of those very different perspectives, and they will give us their thoughts on how we proceed, or even if we proceed. And sometimes we don't proceed. But they look at it from every single part. Anything that happens in the National Park Service has to go through that kind of scrutiny. Part of our job is to preserve for future generations. We can't paint a building without going through that. We can't touch a window, we can't touch a door without going through that. Because our job of preservation is to make sure that you not only get a chance to see it, but your children's children's, and theirs beyond. That they all get a chance to see it. So we have to be very careful how we do things. And that's one of the reasons why when we acquire something, we're very, very difficult to change it. The second time the Park Service was challenged was by the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance. And this was about off-road vehicles and off-road travel. There were vehicles that were traveling off the road and were tearing up the parks. And so they felt like they could do that without tearing up the parks. And the Park Service actually agreed with it. And the Park Service was then challenged by the Southern Utah Alliance, which was a conservation organization, and they didn't agree. And later on, the judge came back and he reinforced that your number one mission, National Park Service, is to preserve. Because if you don't preserve it, you can't talk about it. You can't tell the story. The act makes it seem like they're both the same, but in their mind, there's one that is just a little bit higher. You preserve first. So anything that you do in the park, any kind of activities that we allow in the park, we look at it from that perspective. Can we allow that activity to continue and still preserve the park? And sometimes it's not just about what's under the ground or what's above the ground, but many times we try to preserve the historic scenery. So when you come to Chatham, I want to, as much as humanly possible, allow you to see Chatham the way it was within our period of significance. Therefore, I'm going to limit the kind of activity that goes on up there so that you have that experience. Everything we do is under that. Fredericksburg, the park, was created by an act of Congress February 24, 1927. And when it was originally created, Congress found two people. Actually, they told the War Department, because at that time, the War Department had all of what we call the cannibal parks, Civil War parks, and they were going to turn it over to the Park Service. But he told them to go out and find, and I always think this was neat, because I know from being at Petersburg was created the same way. They had to find one soldier, Union soldier from the north, one Confederate soldier from the south, and they had an Army Corps of Engineer person with them. And they told them to go out through all of this area, look at all the battles, look at all the battlefields, look at all the earthworks, look at the routes that the Army moved in, look at the particular places where they made a stand that made a significant turn in the battle. And they said, we want you to show us what they are, tell us what they are, bring that back to us, give us a report. And then when they did that, they charged the park to go out and pursue those pieces of land. And we're still pursuing them to this very day. Some of it we've got, some of it we've lost, because we didn't get to it in time, something was built over top of it, or it was bulldozed and was no longer viable. But to this very day, we continue to pursue those pieces of land from that law and regulation. And we cannot change it, because the Organic Act I just read from you was done by an act of Congress. The establishment of the Park of Fredericksburg was done by an act of Congress. So when I acquire those lands, it's almost going to take an act of Congress for me to get rid of them. There's certain very, very arduous steps that I had to go through. When I was at Petersburg, we had a building that really didn't relate to the park. And I wanted to do a land exchange so I could get that building out of the park, because we weren't putting any money into it. It was falling apart. It was a part of another piece of land. It took me, I was in Petersburg 12 years. It took me every bit of those 12 years to make that happen, because of the steps and the scrutiny and everything we had to go through. So, the last thing I want to leave you with, one of the things that we're looking for in the park, one of the things that we're doing, is one, is we want to tell everybody's story. So as we talk about the parks, you think about the stories we've always told, the stories we've left out, stories we've not told. So over the coming years, we are striving to tell those stories. We're striving to find them out, seek them out. We talk about Chatham. Chatham's a beautiful place. Chatham was also a plantation. At one point, there were 70 soldiers buried at Chatham. Later they moved them over to the cemetery. There are still 3 unknown soldiers buried there. So that's very bloody ground. It's almost hallowed ground. We want to preserve place, which we've talked about. We want to develop communications with stakeholders, partners, and friends such as yourself. Whenever things happen, whenever land is, and there's good development, right? But then there's certain pieces that we want to preserve. And when that happens, the Park Service is viewed as another landowner. There's nothing special about us when we enter into these negotiations. We'll do our part, but we don't have a big stick other than the shirt. But when we enter in, we're another landowner. So we want to make friends. We want to make alliances so that as we go to deal with these things, that we have partners. So we want to have partners. We want to make alliances. We want to be able to communicate. And as I stated before, we have a statement that's like, people are loving us to death. So when we go to do things in the park, when I go to make changes at Chatham, I want to be able to communicate with you so you know why I'm doing it, right? And maybe you have a better idea. Maybe there's some way we can come in agreement and we can help. And that's it. That's all I have. So at this point, if you want to ask any questions, any thoughts, go ahead.
First of all, my sister and I went to Slippery Rock.
Oh, great.
Still a college in the 70s.
Uh-huh.
So it's good to meet somebody, go Rockets. I assume they're still called Rockets since they're university. But anyway,
Yes.
what is the status of volunteering now? I mean, I have volunteered at the Elwood Manor in the past, and I'm also volunteered at another national park. My experience with volunteering is 2 different experiences. Where at Elwood, I felt like my volunteerism was being curtailed. Where at the other national park, they actually paid for my pesticide license. So I can expand my volunteerism there. So I'm having 2 different
So you
experiences.
said they pay for your pesticide license?
Yes, I do invasive species.
If you come to us, I pay for that too. I said, if you want to come to us, I would pay for that too.
You already have somebody doing that.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I've already met them.
Okay.
But anyways, the volunteer experience is 2 differently. Others, it's Shenandoah. At Shenandoah, they expanded my duties there.
Mhm.
Where when I was volunteering at Elwood, I just felt like my duties as a volunteer were starting to be curtailed. I'm wondering what the future is for volunteers.
So let me try to deal with that. First part is, during COVID, everything shut down.
Yes.
Also during that time, the superintendent found another job.
Yes.
Also during that time, the chief of interpretation retired, the deputy chief of interpretation retired. So there was no leadership, so things just kind of fell off.
Yes, we all experienced that.
Right. So now that we've come back, we're trying to get things restarted. Now, when it comes to Elwood, the way that the stories were being told there, they always came from a certain perspective, and they weren't considering everybody's perspective. The Park Service has changed how it tells stories. So we used to tell stories from a very authoritative manner. So in other words, you come in and I'm going to tell you, this is what you're going to hear, this is what you're going to think, this is what was right, this is what was wrong. Now when I was standing here and I said we want to tell everybody's perspective, when I talked about Dick Poplar, there's a group of people, right, people who embrace the Confederacy, which is not, I'm not judging right or wrong, okay? Part of the stain, in my opinion, on the Confederacy was slavery. So some people, I think, telling the Dick Poplar story and his embracing, an African American embracing that was made them feel a certain way. When I hear that story, it almost makes me angry. One, because like I said, that's not the kind of story. I don't want my daughter learning a story about a man who embraced a community that felt like he was not a man. A community that felt like he had no rights, that he really did not belong, right? I don't want her embracing that kind of story. So I want to hear a different story. I want to hear a story that speaks to me. Part of what the National Park Service is doing, they're changing their interpretation to something called audience-centered experience. And what that means is, I'm going to tell you that story. Let's say we talk about Dick Popper. We're going to tell a story about Dick Popper. But we're not only going to say, well, Dick Popper seemed to have embraced these folks, but we're also going to say that, well, let's think about that. He's in a confederacy. He's freed, but he has family. I'm sure there's some of his family that were enslaved. I'm sure that even though he was free, he was still under some kind of subject because that society felt a certain way about him. So if I'm in jail with them and they ask me to go free, that might show some kind of alliance. Why would I do that when I know I can go live with these people, right? So we would tell the whole story and then let you draw your conclusions. That wasn't happening that way. So we tried to change it. We tried to tell a different story. We started talking with the president, trying to negotiate, and we could not come to an understanding. And at that point, the president decided that, we said you can still be here, but we're going to tell a different story. We're going to do this a different way. We're not going to have what we call them house tours. You go to this room, to this room, to this room, to that room. We want to tell kind of an overview, take you to different pieces, let you explore on your own, be there to give you more information. That was not happening. And there was resistance to that. And we were adding different pieces to that story, some about enslavement, and there was some resistance to that. So the president decided that he did not want to go forward. We are looking for more volunteers. We are giving that training. We've done it 2 or 3 times. And at one point, we actually were out there at Elwood looking for volunteers. We had it kind of like an open house. Mm-hmm. So we're looking to revive that. We're looking to restore it. We want people to come. But as the Park Service learns about how we want to advance, right? As we learn about how to tell those stories to be inclusive, we want everybody to embrace that. Okay.
Thank you. Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we were talking about the Organic Act being started in 1916, and I'm wondering if there's any context of that date. The United States was on the verge of entering World War I. Is there any connection between those 2 events?
I can't tell you that because I don't know that. But I can tell you this. Let me say this much. When we came here from England, right, when people came over to start the country, right, as a country, as we advanced, we began to look back at the past. And we began to compete with other countries. We wanted to say we were a country just like any place else, right? But we could not compete with, Rome. We could not compete with, their arenas or aqueducts. We could not compete with the cathedrals in England because they were so much older. But what we had at that time that they didn't have was the Grand Canyons, the Yellowstone, the Yosemites. As people went west and they started discovering these places out there, and they started noticing how beautiful they were, the government said, we should preserve this. They talk about the Park Service as the crown jewels, right? Those were our crown jewels. So they made a determination at that time to preserve it because it was something that we had in spades that other places did not. It was something that represented the National Park Service. Now, one of the things that we're looking to change as we go forward in the future is that, when you look at Native American history, it goes way back. their history goes so far back that we're trying to stop using prehistoric because their history goes so far back beyond that. We did not value them when the country began. So we're starting to value them now. And we're starting to make that a part of the story. So I guess what I'm saying to you is that I don't know that there was anything going on between the two, but I do know what led up to it and what spurred them to want to preserve these lands. And it went on. Everything, I think about the National Park Service. The National Park Service is the heart and soul of the country. Everything significant, everything that's very important, everything that drove us, every major milestone step we took, you can find that in the National Park Service. There's a national park for it, or there's somebody in the national park talking about it. The National Park Service is the heart and soul. I don't know how many times I've had a congressman or a judge or somebody come out to a national park to kind of recenter themselves. Not just because of the natural, but because of the historical. Why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we where we are? It's in the parks. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's what I had. Go ahead.
I really like you said history is not about the past, it's the future. Seems the historians and everybody, politicians, are digging up the past and saying, we did bad things. You want to know what we did wrong. Everybody here understands that. We did bad things, we shed blood, but we got to think about the future. Don't repeat the sins of the past. I got a history journalism in '64. The colleges now, they're wrong. That's a big topic. But the colleges are Marxists now. And what's happening now, the rioting and I don't know.
Is there a question there?
But you named it right there. They make a great book, they're great historians, but it's a lot of facts and names. That's what the kids don't like to learn in school.
Yeah, I guess.
But you got.
Yeah, because I'll be honest with you, I was the same way. Like I didn't want, it was hard for me to memorize dates and numbers and dates. If that came up in my class, my GPA was gonna take a hit. Because I had a heck of a time. But if you told me a story,
Sure.
a series of events, and what was the lesson? You know? And I think, and I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about, but I think when I think about George Washington, right? George Washington was a good man, but he was complicated, right? He was a general, he was a president, and he was a slave owner. Doesn't necessarily mean he's a bad guy, right? But for some of us, we don't want you to bury it, right? Mm-hmm. We want you to tell the good, the bad, the ugly, because for some of us, the survival of a horrific event was a monumental achievement. And when you bury that, you're burying the very essence of a people, right? Same thing with the Native Americans. You know, we went to battle with them, we fought them, right? And the country's like, wow, we settled the West. But to them, it was different. It's not necessarily bad or good. It's just, they don't want you to bury the things that they went through. You know, and I don't think we should look at any history, any stories that was bad or good. Mm-hmm. It just is.
It happened.
Yes. There was another question back here, but go ahead.
Yeah, I have another question about Elwood. My family owned Elwood for 70 years,
Mm-hmm.
and then my father sold the house to the Park Service, but he donated all the acreage around it to preserve it. And then I spent 17 years with the Saint-Gaudens Battlefield, restoring the house, training interpreters, and all that. And my question is, I mean, it's a national treasure, and why the hours have been decreased, why the interpreters have changed. I mean, we did a wonderful job. What's going on?
And I'm gonna tell you, I know you did a wonderful job, and I appreciate everything that you all done. They showed me pictures of that place and what it looked like before you all got there, and they showed me pictures afterwards. And we are very grateful for the work that you've done. So as far as the interpreters, I'm not sure what you mean by that. I mean, I've talked about what happened with the volunteers, and some of the volunteers have come back. Some interpreters leave for various reasons. They retire, they leave, they go on. As far as the hours, you know that there's a austerity, right, within the government as a whole. There's a want to control and reduce spending within the government. I'm not judging it right or good or bad, but there's a want to do that. And in a lot of places in the Park Service, it stayed flat and it slowly increased, but it didn't always keep up. So when you have more to do than what you have resources to do it, you have to make decisions about what you're going to do, what you're not going to do, how often you're going to do it. And sometimes we look for factors and indicators for why we would and why we would not. When I was at Petersburg, we had 4 different sites that we tried to staff. We had to let go of people, not let them go, but as they left, we didn't fill certain positions. Sometimes the way that inflation goes or the way that the pay goes, the parks budget doesn't always keep up with that. So we had to make decisions. Certain buildings had to either close or we had to reduce hours. And the decisions that made that was I will go to a building and I will look at how many people are showing up there. When did they show up there? What time of the day did they show up there? If I got one building where there's 1,000 people showing up, another one where there's 800, another one where there's 200, right? I'm gonna look at the one that's 200 to reduce hours. And then I'm gonna try to look at, well, when do people typically show up? Do they come in the morning? Do they come at night? Do they come during the summer? Do they come? And I'm gonna try to target those particular areas. And it's not fun. And I know it hurts. But that's how we try to make those decisions based on that kind of information. And after a while, we review it. So it doesn't mean it's always gonna be the same. Go ahead.
I'd like to talk about 2 areas. You mentioned Yellowstone. Very popular because of the series that's on now. People are enamored about Yellowstone Park, families, etc., the ranching, all of that. Also, visitors have increased to the area. So, do you see any impact? My first question is, do you see impact from visitors to Yellowstone? And my second question is about area around here. I'm not up to date on Wilderness Crossing, so perhaps you could say if you know what's going on with that. So Yellowstone and Wilderness Crossing.
So I'll give you very short answers to both of them. I'm gonna give you very short answers to both of them. First answer is I've been to 12 sites within the National Park Service. Every last one of them was east of the Mississippi, right? I worked between Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia. I went out there to fight fires. I went out there to train, and that was about the end of it. I know they are getting impacted by visitation. I know they have been getting impacted by visitation since the 70s. And they're still getting impacted now. So I can tell you that much about it. As far as Orange County, as far as this development, I'm gonna give you a website. I'm gonna give you a website. I'm sorry, go ahead.
My question was specific to the Wilderness Crossing possibilities, and you mentioned that the Park Service in these type of development discussions is just another landowner, but I would just hope that you have some proactive plans, because part of that development might include a rerouting of Route 20's intersection with Route 3, which in my mind would carve the hillside a little bit too close to the Grant headquarters site. So I just want to make sure
I
that...
tell you, it gets worse than that, because the rerouting goes right through land that we're trying to acquire.
Right.
But it's owned by the developer. And that's what happens sometimes when you don't get there quick enough. We do work very diligently behind the scenes.
Okay.
And I know this is going to seem, people are going to be like, I know you're going to say, but it does work, right? We do send strongly worded letters. But it has an effect. I do go out and meet with the people, like in Orange County, in various places. We do talk to them. We do try to explain to them. we do reach out to other partners to help us in these endeavors as well. I'm not against development, but like you said, there's some areas we feel we should be preserved, and we are working behind the scenes, doing everything we can to try to help with this.
Thank you.
Mhm. Sure, go ahead.
Going back to Elwood, you mentioned the budgeting issues.
Mhm.
We cost Elwood and the Park Service nothing. We are strictly volunteer, and we could have learned perhaps everything else. There were very dedicated people in the organization. I was one of the newer ones.
Mhm.
There are folks who have spent years out there building and whatever, and it just felt
I understand that.
bad.
I understand that. I
And we were
understand.
trying in a big way to deal with the issue of enslaved people.
Mhm.
One thing the Elwood site misses that would be helpful is the location and some indication of the enslaved people's dwellings. And unfortunately, it was a stop and a go and never, and whatever, so all we could do was point out the window and say why this prosperous plantation was as it was. And these people had a very strong part in why it was so prosperous.
Right. So, do you think there were any enslaved people working in Elwood itself?
Do I think there were enslaved people? Absolutely.
Okay. So, if you think about it, you really don't need that area out there to tell that story. Because the story was a part of Elwood itself. So you could tell that story from and in Elwood. One of the other things that I was saying was like we were trying to turn a corner, and some volunteers may have wanted to go along, some didn't. The new chief of interpretation wants there to be a ranger out there, and that's part of what's having us kind of cut back on the time also. She wants someone to be there most of the time, you know, if not all the time when that place is open.
And
Some of that,
that was always appreciated,
yeah,
but we also had the distinction of being an operating facility during that COVID period.
mhm,
We couldn't go in the house, but we were there through the whole time
mhm,
and doing what we could. Just after the hospital room had been built,
yes,
and we had to say, we can't show you this beautiful hospital room
mhm.
because of COVID or
I
whatever. It just,
appreciate that.
it just was hurt. Oh, okay.
I do appreciate that. I understand. I know sometimes, I learn through life, sometimes things hurt, and it's just, there's not much you can say about it. I can't pretty that up. You know, I understand and I acknowledge it and I get how you feel. I really do. And I do empathize with you.
Yeah, as I said, I was new to it,
Mhm.
but I knew I had come into an organization with a fabulous amount of information in my colleagues' heads.
I can tell you
Thanks
this
to
much.
John Hennessy.
Mhm. I can tell you this much. We were talking with the president. We were trying to work something out, but we could not come to an agreement. If we could come to an agreement, we could move on. Now, I will also say this, we're still looking for volunteers for Elwood, because we're going to have training. So you can still go back. You may not be a part of, that organization, but if you come to the park, sign up as a volunteer, we will put you through the training, and you could be right back out there. It's not a dead issue.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page here. That's good choice.
Go ahead.
I know John Hennessy was anxious to tell the slave story there.
Mhm.
And I don't know, since I've been gone, I don't know how far that's been carried, but.
We're still turning the corner because we're training our own rangers to be able to tell it. I'm gonna tell you something. I'm gonna tell you how I met my wife, okay? And I'm gonna let a little secret out because I think we've been married about almost 30 years, so statute of limitations is on. She worked for me. I was her supervisor. And she tells stories about the enslaved. okay? I came into the library one day, and she was sitting in the library. We were at Booker T Washington. She was sitting in the library, falling in tears, crying her eyes out. And when I came up to her, I said, "What is going on? What's wrong?" She was reading a book that was called Weevils in the Wheat. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. Whenever slavery ended, okay, and the enslaved people started to die off, they commissioned people to go talk to them and to get their stories directly from them. She was reading a story about a man that, he was an enslaved man that sung a lot. And that's how he got through things. That's how he made himself happy. The person who was the overseer didn't like it. He made the guy dig a hole, he poured tar in there, and then he lit him on fire. Now, the reason why I tell you that, and I say I empathize, is slavery is not an easy story to tell. It's downright depressing. And you can't talk about it day in and day out all the time. It'll rip you apart. It's like I said, my wife was doing research. She's crying, right? So we have to talk about how do we do it? How do we say it? You know, how do we honor, you know, people who have a connection to that, but not have you going home every day crying? You see what I mean? So we're going through that training, you know, to teach people those kind of things and and maybe sometimes it's not, maybe it's an exhibit or something of that nature. But I hear you. Sure.
I have a question about, is it Chatham? Is the name of it? Is that a newly acquired property, and are you currently developing that? Is
Yeah,
that?
Chatham's been around a while.
It has, was that the headquarters for the Union Army?
Yes, when the Union Army came
Okay.
through, they took that over. It was a hospital at one point. It was also a plantation prior to that. And so yeah, it was quite a bit of
Okay.
activity up there. For that.
You mentioned the Park Service interest in acquiring additional properties. Could you give us an idea of what you're talking about, how much, or what is on your wish list?
So I'm probably not going to say that. I'm going to tell you why. You know, we talk to people behind the scenes, but as soon as I say this property's on the wish list, whoever has that property, if they want to sell it, it's going to quadruple in value.
But just in order of magnitude, you're talking about 1, 2, 10 pieces of property that are,
We're probably talking about a few thousand acres.
okay.
And this area is kind of one of the primary areas for the Civil War activity. Is that correct? Or you've got
I would say
Gettysburg?
all of Virginia is a primary area for the Civil War. I used to say you can't spit without hitting it. Everything, and the way we do it is we try to look for very, very, where a lot of people lost their lives. We look for places where there was a turning point, you know, where there was a battle that proved to be very decisive, right? We look for those areas, and those are the areas that we try to try and preserve. And there's a lot of them that we've cut back. I think Petersburg, we got a bill through Congress, which added, the park is 2,500 acres, and it was going to add another 10,000 acres to the park. That was from a group, a commission that went out studying the area. They whittled that down from over 100,000 acres. And they just kept whittling it down, and they got it down to the best of the best of the best. They looked for what was close to the park that could be reasonably reached and managed. No, you had a question. Go ahead.
Do you know if there are any plans for the Park Service to take over the graffiti house?
The who?
The graffiti house.
That's gonna be a state park.
I'm not familiar with that.
It's Brandy Station, I think they call it.
Yeah, Brandy Station.
But that's gonna be a state park.
Oh.
It's gonna be started July of next year. It's already been done.
Thank you.
Superintendent Lewis, I guess for the moment, I'd like to take that issue of preservation again, and look to the future and ask what is concretely, or more specifically, being done now. Right now, our area is under siege, right? The wilderness Davis Crossing development, the development that is going to begin modestly with a gas station and so forth, virtually adjoining the center of the Chancellorsville battlefield, all right? I want to know that the park services, that the military parks personnel are reaching out.
You can reach out to them. You can reach out, you know, you can write a letter, you can call them, and you can express that. And I'll be quite honest with you, that is the strongest advocacy we have. Because if you reach out and you say something to them and you push them, if they want to know, they'll call me. And then I'll tell them. But I do have conversations with my boss, who's a deputy regional director. I have conversations with the regional director about what's going on down here. And we're doing everything we can to protect those pieces of land. I know it probably doesn't satisfy you.
You just said you can't do anything, but you're trying.
What I'm doing is, what I can do is limited. And that's not me.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Rogers, for that very illuminating talk, and I think we have a lot of things to consider. And to your point about this area being very central to a lot of the Civil War action, I'd invite you to just step down the hall towards the members' lounge. There's a nice display case of artifacts that have been found on this very soil. So please take time to do that either today or the next time you're in Clubhouse. Without further ado then, do we have the sign-up sheet that's gone through? Oh, our secretary has said he has possession of it. So thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you next month. Before you go, please remember to visit our website often, civilwarstudygroup.org. We make every attempt on a regular basis to provide informative content. Thank you for visiting, and God bless.